Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office, at Family Office TV, Angelo Robles podcast, and most importantly, for my members of SFO Continuity, appreciate you all and welcome so much. Today, in my hundreds of different programs I covered, I never covered this subject, and we have the perfect guests for us today as well. The subject, in case you're wondering, navigating toxic loyalty, nepotism, narcissism in multi-generational family offices. We'll even cover, maybe a little bit of a surprise to our guest, a little bit of and one of them already is that, what's called dark triad, and the impact that could have on families and their family offices. Our special guest today is Richard Wolkowitz, founder and CEO of Xylogenesis. And we're really very much looking forward to today's discussion, which applies to entrepreneurial families, first-generation families, multi-generational families, those that work and serve within a single family office, and of great insight to those that service those communities as well. Richard, it's been a long time. How are you?
Doing well, Angela. So good to be here. So proud of your work you're doing for the community.
Well, thank you. And to give my audience a little bit of context, Richard truly is an amazing gentleman, and he's going to be a little too overly modest, and he could definitely read a bio that would be like, wow. But I will tell you, from my 2 decades in the family office community, I don't know if I could even count on one hand the people that would have not only Richard's great insight, intellect, and empathy, but the fact that he is a generational dynastic family member, an entrepreneur and wealth creator, has worked in non-family, for him meaning family office, so understands the dynamic of being at a family, and has advised at an extremely high level family and family offices around the world. So, Richard, you do have an amazing background. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Angelo. I've got one goal, one KPI I measure myself every day, and it's how many families did I help. So hopefully we can help some families here together.
Oh, that'd be excellent. And you happen to be taking one of my favorite acronyms that I do in some of the consulting work that I do with families. We're giving away our secrets, though, Richard. KPIs are very, very important. And that probably, we'll save this for a part 2 discussion on more of the structuring and operational efficiencies in the family office, but things like objectives and key results, key performance indicators. There's a variety of things that high-level corporate America does that, unfortunately, not enough family offices do. But again, subject for another discussion that we could easily kill 2 or 3 hours on. But today, again, I'm really excited about this topic. Why don't we start really getting right to the headline? How do you define toxic loyalty within the family office? And what are early signs that family members or advisors should be looking out for?
That's a great way to kick it off. So defining toxic loyalty first is defining loyalty. And so to me, what is loyalty, and making sure we're all on the same page? Loyalty is that seek for allegiance, for faithfulness, for fidelity, for true authenticity, and all that leads to is the development of trust. And so within the family business arena, within the family enterprise arena, especially with family offices, the desire to have that loyalty on both sides of the table, all sides of the table, is extreme. And so what can happen over time is that desire for loyalty, as anything, we got to maintain a balance. Any one extreme, too far one way or the other, can put things off balance. And so what can happen is that zeal, that desire to have loyalty, to prove yourself, that fidelity to the next gen, to the leading gen, to family office staff, to employees, to the outside advisors, and vice versa. All that can lead to unhealthy behavior. And so what to do? I think just recognizing that it's inevitable, right? It's predictable. It's going to happen. And so have your antennas up and be aware of it.
And what are some signs, speaking of being aware, that families and or their family office or advisors should be alert to?
Sure. So the most common identification of it is it's called yes people. right? Surrounding yourself with yes people. And so the principle, for example, let's take the head of the family and the head of the family system. People are always trying to please that person. And we're going to get to the topic later about narcissism, but trying to prove yourself over and over again to strong family founders, to people who maybe came from no wealth and established great wealth, or families that had great wealth and made it even greater. There's a desire to prove yourself to that person. And so sometimes getting in means going along with the flow. Sometimes getting in and getting that acknowledgement means not confronting, always saying yes. And saying yes all the time can become a problem throughout the entire system. And so family offices, family enterprises, family businesses all can eventually reach a plateau or even start to degrade in performance. And so sometimes you need to ask yourself, is that performance lacking? Is the family harmony lacking? Is the financial integrity of the system lapsing and having problems? And looking at the people capital, the human capital part, is generally the first place to start. And understanding that toxic loyalty, that overzealousness, to have that faithfulness can play a role in that.
And given, and you may agree, that the big three to me, broadly speaking, in family offices are people, systems, and lately technology, that relates, as basically every subject we're going to talk about today, to people. And by far, people are the number one determinant, in my opinion, even ahead of systems, relative to the success and dynastic success of the family. So basically, whether it's early in the generation, meaning the wealth creator, or probably a little more likely, depending on the scenario, dynastic families, this is inevitable. This is going to happen on some level, toxic loyalty. We're talking about it as if it's relatively easy to identify and then address. But I think in reality, maybe it's not so easy to identify, and who's going to speak up?
You're right. And people is the key to every enterprise. People talk about it in terms of culture. They talk about it in strategy, innovation. Is going to be the next leader? And all of that confounds itself to this toxic loyalty because these systems are become larger and larger. The stakes are higher and higher, and control and power really are driving people towards that. And it happens at so many different levels, Angelo. It's not just the family, and we can talk about the family. We can certainly talk about the family employees, but it also impacts the non-family trusted advisors, those that aren't even involved. And so all these three levels within the family, the employment system, and the trusted advisors all are part of this challenge.
In what ways can toxic loyalty manifest itself among key decision makers, and how can it impede what I would call sound governance?
So if we start with the premise that multi-generational families, right, also have multi-generational non-family employees, they also have multi-generational trusted advisors, right? Maybe from the same firm. Even it could even be children of the original trusted advisors that go into the same profession as them. So you've got all these things working together, where you've got the family system looking at how to advance, how to perform, how to keep that durable family harmony. You've got the employees in the system who have their children many times working in the system. And then you have the trusted advisors. So governance really plays an important role in helping this, making sure there are independent directors, other committees. People who aren't part of the system need to sometimes be able to step out and come into the system to place that visibility on what could be going on. Another key solution I've found is at the board level. When family offices are forming boards and looking for independent directors, they primarily put the emphasis on wealth, investments, governance, the business that the family is in, but they often leave out one other strategic important advisor, and that's a CHRO, a Chief Human Resources Officer. And if you think about it, it's kind of odd because the whole point of family is connectivity with the family and advancing the family. And one of my core principles I teach families about is durable family harmony. It's making decisions for the long-term impact and health of the family. And so as you look at that and you understand that there are multi-generational family members in the enterprise, there are multi-generational non-family members in the business, and there are also non-family trusted advisors all cycling through, not having that lens of a human resource officer that's an independent is a great tool to have, and it's laps throughout the systems.
Richard, if you don't mind, and this is what makes conversations exciting and maybe me a little different, I wouldn't say that I disagree, but I'm going to challenge you on certain things so I could learn, I think would be good for my audience. Actually, on two core frameworks that you spoke about. Of course, governance is incredibly important. I could argue, I think maybe culture comes right before it. But leading into governance effectively is how decisions are made. The larger a family is, especially by family members, and arguably that would come from generations, could I make the argument it could weave its way into becoming hierarchical, which is not always a bad thing for making faster decisions, and the one that's never good, bureaucracy. I now have a lot of different hands in the soup. I now have lots of different, what appears to be measures to protect me, but are they often, or quote unquote, the family, but are they often overdone? Do they have a self-importance to the people creating it and those that are brought into the governance where they may not be a family member, they don't have skin in the game, they may be really, really good, but maybe they're not. And could I make the argument it adds complexity and they're no longer nimble?
So two great points, and I don't think we disagree at all. In fact, you answered the question of how do you define governance? Because when talking about governance, it's probably one of the most misunderstood concepts out there. And when you think about governance, when I teach about governance, it really is governance equals culture. Governance equals the family's culture. Because when you do the tactical things of governance, whether or not you're in the family system, setting up the constitution, the charter, the family assembly, the family council, how families make decisions together. When you move over to the ownership system, again, who's on the board, how you function, are there committees, who's observing, who's voting, who has the right to certain information. When you're in the business, the family office, the family foundation, again, how are decisions being made? If you map all that out, and you step back, way far back, and you look at all those pathways of decision-making, who's involved, that really is the family's culture. And so I tell people, when you're thinking about designing governance systems, understand this is defining your family's culture, your values, what you find important. And so I agree with you 100% on that first point about the importance of people, and that equals the family culture, and it's carried out through great governance design and implementation.
And excellent. And the other topic that you brought up was relative, we both agree, and how could really anyone not, knowing anything about family offices, that by far the number one determinant of success is people. Now, within that is culture, leadership, effectively governance, how decisions are made. Admittingly, it's broad. But to assume that systems or technology are going to overcome people as being number one, well, who knows with AI in 10 or 20 years, but we're not quite there yet. But where I do want to maybe push back is too strong of a word, but my audience is going to be expecting this. They know that I have sometimes been critical of HR. I think it's become like, I think of the show The Office and the character Toby, was it? Yes. Like, and I've worked in large corporations before, each decade for each of the last couple, and they definitely have their fair share of Tobys in HR. And that goes back a little bit to what I said about being bureaucratic. And I don't want to get in too much trouble, so I'm going to be a little careful with what I say. But we're in a world now where I'm concerned that the people deciding on the most important thing in my family office are overly skewed to what they were taught, which is leaning in a certain direction that I don't think fits in quite as well in the family office. If I could slightly twist, and you could call it semantics, it's fine, the words around a little bit. How about a chief people officer? Someone who's dedicated with an obsession to having the best quality and best fit people inside the family office. Now, again, you could say, what's the difference? Because I've been so scarred by the verbiage HR and my experiences with it. Again, it's a non-family member making very critical decisions inside my generational family office, and I want to know where they're coming from. And if I'm skeptical, if that's just me, then that's just me. But how would you counterbalance that, or what would you say?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think words do matter and definitions and titles matter. It sets a tone. Again, it goes back to the family's culture. And so you're right. Calling it a human resource officer versus chief people officer gives a different vibe. And
Yeah.
what are family offices? It's a vibe, right? It's a certain culture. Every family's got their own. So some families might like that formality, chief human resources officer. They're very corporate, they're very big. They might really like that. Other families might like the chief people officer. And there's lots of different names, but I think you're going to the point of who is that person? What is the structure surrounding that person? And what is that person's roles and responsibilities? So earlier, when I was talking about the need to have that kind of lens on the board, it really is that lens, looking at the person, right? And I think a lot of family offices make the mistake of not really understanding themselves and what they're looking for in that individual professional. So a chief human resources officer or chief people officer in a family office better have the highest EQ, the highest EQ, the highest AQ, adaptability quotient, to be able to pivot and move, not be a dictator. This isn't their system, right? They are helping to execute the family system. And someone at that level needs to have been either a family member in a family office or a family business by background, or a family member who's worked in another family office to really understand those family dynamics and how to navigate. Again, it's about keeping the balance, about keeping the harmony, working towards durable family harmony. And you're right, the wrong chief people officer, the wrong chief human resources officer can really do damage to a family system. And that is really important to look at their background, not their technical, right? There's the left brain of us and there's the right brain of us. And again, the left brain goes to the technical, the right brain goes to the irrational or the subjective. And so when we're looking to hire people, whether it's in that role or all the other roles in a family office, we need to balance both, not either or. We need to have the best technical chief person officer ever, but that person also must have the highest EQ and adaptability to work with the family.
Very well said, Richard. I will leave a parting comment. I recommend on my at Family Office or at Family Office TV this summer, I interviewed Nathan Troutman, kind of an iconic figure that has worked with like 3 of the top 20 families in the world over the past couple of decades. He spoke about it in my program, so I could mention it. One of them was Paul Allen, the iconic co-founder of Microsoft. And something along the lines, not his exact words, but something along the lines of, Angelo, after a couple of months, I realized Paul had about 450 people in his family office. I'm like, it may just be a little bit too big. So I asked him, well, people are the number one area for success in the family office. At that level, they must be hardcore HR centric. He goes, oh, yeah. Like it wasn't even anything to do with Microsoft. It was strictly inside their entities. Well, did you deal with HR in terms of adapting the family office and the people? Something along the lines of, yeah, they were basically the first one that I got rid of. I was like, now he didn't mean get rid of it from a total unit. He probably more ignored them and went in some different directions to work with the principal. And they did make some adaptations to what they called HR. But Nathan is kind of an old school Southern gentleman. And I found that, of course, it made me chuckle. But again, another subject we could probably go 2+ hours in, but we have so much to cover. How can family offices objectively, or effectively, maybe is the better word I'm looking for, balance loyalty with the need for objective, merit based decision making?
So again, we'll go back to the big word governance and really setting up a process. And whether it's when we started out talking about KPIs, key performance indicators, or OKRs, whatever your method of determining performance is, really setting up the governance, who's in the right seat, what's the title, what's their authority, what's their responsibility, what are the expectations, what are the rules and process around that. And so setting up, first a framework for how the system works, two, having some independence, some independent eyes in there, people that aren't part of the system, people that aren't compensated, rewarded, or disincentivized by what happens. That truly is a key thing to helping families avoid this. But again, recognizing it's going to be there. It already is there. Again, multi-generational family employees are throughout the system. And I've seen that in almost every family I've worked with for decades now. And so just that item alone, where a non-family member has their own children working in the enterprise, that creates several different toxic loyalties right there. The child of the non-family employee is loyal to their parent, but the parent is very loyal not only to their own child, but the family that they've served for many decades. And so you're putting people in conflict with each other. And so really defining roles, responsibilities, reporting, who reports to who, and creating that clear channel is extremely important.
What role, and you hinted at it, but I know we have a fair amount of people that are legal, accounting, MFOs, family governance people, advisors that shockingly listen or watch my program. What role can external advisors play in identifying and mitigating the effects of toxic loyalty?
Well, the first question you have to ask, are some of these long-term trusted advisors part of toxic loyalty? Right?
You said it, not me. Yes.
Yeah. And it's an obvious thing. And I practiced law for a decade. I became part of family systems. What's the barrier? What's the boundary? You're, as a professional, and the best ones do, they all have what's capital C. They care. They care so much about their clients. They're proactive. They're looking well beyond the issue at hand. And sometimes that care can cross a boundary. There's also other boundaries and problems that outside trust advisors have. They have the pressure of AUM collection, billable hour collection, and they report to people in a firm. And so if you're going to challenge a principal, they're about to drive off the road, and you as a trust advisor say, should I confront the principal? I see something bad's happening, but if I don't do it right, I might just jeopardize the account. If I jeopardize the account, how do I explain that to my partners? The AUM just walked out the door. The billable hours are now gone. We lost a client. I was trying to do my best, but I goofed on the execution, or I goofed and overstepped my boundary, or I goofed and I tried to help the principal, but I really got upset the NextGen or the internal family office staff by doing that. And guess what? Now I'm on the outs. So many times the outside trusted advisor balances their true fiduciary duty to a family member and to their client for their own selfishness. Even though they may not be that aware of it, just impliedly, they're balancing their need for professional development, professional success versus the advice that goes to clients. And so trusted advisors need to check themselves on that. And I've seen many times trusted advisors call me, they probably call other people too, to say, hey, Rich, this is a slippery slope that I'm observing. I need someone else to get in. I'm too close to the situation. I'm not even prepared professionally, perhaps, to even handle the situation. While I care, I might set the family back. So can you help, or do you know somebody who can? So the best thing trusted advisors need to do is, one, stop and think, whose interest are they really serving by acting or not acting? And two, seek help of others, right? Who may be able to play a great supporting role. I can't tell you how many families appreciate when a trusted advisor actually says, this is beyond my capacity. I am not prepared to handle that, but I have a solution. I know Angelo Robles. He can come in and help. And families appreciate that more than you could ever imagine.
Excellent comments, of course, Richard. Most family offices, in my experiences around the world for decades, do not last beyond the first generation wealth creator who created it. So, on average, that could be 7 years, could be 10 years, maybe even 15. I think the average for most family offices per last research is about 11, kind of verifying exactly what I said. And I'm going to assume the transition to the rising generation, or lack of transition to the rising generation, and the impact of the perception of the rising generation on the people in the family office are my parents' people. I never really had a great connection with them. I might even think they're a little, who are they loyal to? That's now out the window. And again, this gets to the dynamics of different generations, elders, generation, baby boomers, X, millennials, Gen Z. They have different cultural experiences and how they like to engage and communicate. And unless you're really attuned, going back to your emotional intelligence too, there probably is going to be a disconnect, and they're going to look at it as, what is this entity, this family office, really doing? How much is it really costing? And are there better alternatives?
Absolutely. So families look at the family office differently, right? And I've seen your program, and how do you define the family office? What is a family office? But fundamentally, family offices start out of the position of wealth. They have wealth. How do they manage it? How do they protect it? How do they preserve it? How do they grow it? Right. And so when family offices start from a position of wealth management, and then it leads to investment management, the family office itself becomes a technical element. So the question is, can families then move to the next logical phase of family office world and services, of doing things beyond the original purpose, which is protecting, preserving, and growing that wealth? And that's where families get tripped up, because they don't really put together a strategic plan for their family, a strategic plan for the family office. And so that's a really critical component to why many family offices don't succeed far, because they just don't have a plan. And they were originally created strictly for technical wealth management and investment management, and they haven't thought about how to get to that next phase.
Of course, they're really an investment office, not necessarily a true believing in family continuity, quote unquote, family office. JUs and others have written, and he's a philosopher, so eloquently about all of that. Okay, I guess related, if we're having a subject on toxic loyalty, we do have to talk, as my subject matter of today's discussion, as well, about nepotism. I'm going to actually begin with a slightly weird first question on nepotism. How do you perceive nepotism's role in multi-generational family offices? And here's the unique part: can it ever be a positive force?
That's great. Yeah, so I'm a realist, but I'm going to sound like an optimist here. I think nepotism can be a great thing for the family, for the organization, for the enterprise. It's become a bastardized term because of, we all know the negatives, and it's fun and easy and salacious to talk about the negatives. But really, nepotism is really just giving an advantage to a family or friend. That's the strict definition: giving an advantage to a family or friend. The question is, what do you do with that advantage? And that's where things can either go positive or negative. And so from a continuity standpoint, from a family lens, number one, I mean, let's look at family. Let's look at the non-family employees, and look at the outside trusted advisors, vendors, directors, trustees. So all three lenses, it can be positive. From a family perspective, we know how continuity is going to happen. We know and can plan for the eventual succession, transition, and for our enterprise to continue. And so again, through governance planning, let's set out that nepotism in the right way. From a employee perspective, who is dedicated, and we just talked about sometimes overly dedicated and too loyal, they often wonder what their future is. And if there isn't that next gen coming in necessarily to oversee or to play a role, they get concerned about self. What is my longevity here? This family office isn't set up for the long term. And so maybe I should start looking around about my own security, let alone the family's security. And then from a outside ring, even further, the trusted advisors, the vendors that all support the family's enterprises, they also see what's going on within the system. And they want to see continuity happen. They may not verbalize it. They may not really even know that they're thinking that, but they're investing their time and their resources into this entity and all the portfolio companies that exist. And they want to see that it's going to be a well-stewarded company so that they have longevity with it too. So everyone is hoping for it. And that's where nepotism can come in and play a positive role, because it is fundamentally the next step towards continuity planning.
What are the long-term consequences of unchecked nepotism on leadership, governance, and effectively family harmony?
Again, so we're going to go back to this is a great session you're having, because all these themes are interconnected. So again, if nepotism goes unchecked, we know what's going to happen, right? We've seen the stories, we've read the books, we've seen the made for TV shows. That being said, governance, I'm going to keep going back to governance, setting out a plan. What is the right role? What is the responsibility? Who is the reporting? What are the performance expectations? How do we have proper conversations, some difficult conversations when family members aren't performing well? And do the non-family employees within the system have the ability really to manage? And can they speak up, or are they going to jeopardize their own career? So nepotism gone unchecked really means governance gone unchecked, which really means the family culture isn't really defined. Because if the family culture is defined and we know the values and what's important to the family, then again, that will bleed into governance, and that will bleed into proper planning and execution within the enterprise.
From the perspective of next gen, rising gen leaders, how should nepotism be handled to foster fairness and transparency in governance, the decision making? In other words, as well, if there's multiple family members, but one or maybe two out of six are active, not just from a committee perspective, but maybe more day to day in the family office, that creates a whole bunch of other questions on distributions, on investment decisions, fiduciary responsibility, a trustee too conservative or too aggressive. Well, I'm opening up a can of worms with this question, so I'm going to leave this tough stuff to you, Richard.
Well, let's talk about nepotism in the context of the family itself, or the next gen, right? And contrary to all the fun TV and shows we read about nepotism, right? The families I've worked with, and really I think the vast majority, are really solid citizens, right? They're carrying, actually, the next gen are actually first carrying a burden, right? They're not acting as entitled, but they're born into a system of family members who have achieved greatness. And so for them to step up, right, it's really oftentimes a burden, not a benefit. And so nepotism to them means I get an opportunity, but am I going to mess it up? Can I perform? Can I meet the expectations? Can I generate the revenue? Do I have the performance? Can I keep this all together? You've given me the opportunity, the advantage because of bloodline, but can I actually perform? And so I look at many next gen having this as a burden. Rich, how can I perform? Look at what I'm coming into. So I appreciate that I've got the opportunity. Am I prepared? Am I ready? Right. And so nepotism to them is a scary thing. It's not a birthright that they can just enjoy. It's a birthright with a burden.
That reminds me, there's a gentleman in your state who's an elder in our community. You know him. I had him on about a year ago, and he noted in his very eloquent, raspy voice, Angelo, stewardship could be a very scary word and a burden and an obligation that may even be unfair to many people. And ever since then, about a year ago, it's caused me to be more aware of utilizing that word and what it means. It could very well be a positive for some people, but for some, maybe without mentoring, fairness that you also may be imperfect and mess up. The is there a burden of stewardship, and we should be more careful in our utilization of that word, and more importantly, to make it a fair process within the structure of governance.
That's a fair point, and stewardship really is a tremendous word. It really has a tremendous meaning, and it really does have a tremendous impact on those who are responsible for it or who will be for it. I recall sitting around a room about a year ago with a family, and all the next gen were actually concerned and upset about the future viability of their family office because they felt that the non-family employees just didn't care enough, right? And their zealousness and concern for that performance led to some toxicity. They took that nepotism too far. Now, it's great that the next gen felt ownership, right? They showed care, they showed concern, but in their implementation and carrying that out, that concern, it really caused a disruption in the family office. And they began without any kind of organization of kind of fanning out through the system, poking holes, asking a lot of questions. The family office staff was not used to reporting to multiple next gens, and they would have many conversations, and it caused a lot of confusion. And so the positive of that nepotism was that they all cared. The negative to that overzealousness was exactly that. It caused chaos and confusion and mixed messages, and the staff didn't know what to do. So we really had to rein people back in and talk about governance, and going back to governance of who talks to whom, how we talk to them, when we talk to them, and the appropriateness of a family member who isn't on the board. Family member's not even on a committee. You're just a family member. You can't just barge into the family office and start asking everybody lots of questions without having a real process.
And probably my last question on nepotism, you partially answered it there. But again, this is another subject we could go on for hours about. What are the qualifications for being involved in a committee or a board as a rising generation family member of literally maybe day to day, maybe in a CIO role of working in the family office? And if the qualifications and execution, which is probably more important, qualifications could be overrated. What's your strategy? How do you execute? And are you damn good at what you do? But suppose there is a difference between a family and a non-family member, and it's obvious to a talented non-family member that's going to create an unusual environment in the family office, and probably going to mean it's going to be harder and harder to attract and retain extremely high-level talent. How do you juggle that? And I'm throwing a lot at you here. How do you sometimes tell a family member, you still have to apply, you're making progress, I don't think you're quite there yet. Here's what we'll do. We'll set up a committee of rising generation family members and put you on it to be insightful, to be even a board observer, but I'm not quite ready this year to put you in the role of being day-to-day active in the family office, but maybe one day.
Again, that goes back to really being thoughtful about and being objective about the roles we're creating. And I think going back to the job description, like actually coming up with a job description for what that role should be, and then looking at it objectively to say, do you qualify for that? Now, the advantage of nepotism means that you may not 100% qualify. As opposed to a non-family member, we might find a non-family member that's more qualified than you, but we're willing to invest in you, have you go to school, have you get training, get development, be involved in whatever it is in the industry that you're in to make that gap close, as opposed to bringing someone in who has no gap, because we're looking at continuity planning
Exactly.
so that's really the key, is just doing everything objective and trying to take the emotion out of it, but recognizing, again, toggling back and forth between your left brain. This is what the objective is, to your right brain, which is the family dynamics and the subjective, and how to continue to balance. And that's, again, part of the mistake that people make. They over-index one way or another, and they don't take into both. And again, family office requires the best technical skills. It requires the highest EQ and AQ skills.
Richard, about 23 years ago, psychologists developed a little bit of a framework that they defined, and it got a catchy name, dark triad traits. So there's three things that make it up, and they do tend to be somewhat quote unquote overlapping. Many would argue they could be callous and manipulative as an interpersonal style. I'm assuming they could happen in the family and family members, as well as certainly the non-family members, and they're bad, I would think, but I think this gets a little complicated in multiple different ways. Narcissism is the first one, generally deemed to be grandiosity, pride, egotism, and for me, the challenging one, lack of empathy. How do you go about looking at narcissism either in the family or in a non-bloodline family office executive? Do you screen for it? Is it identified after the fact? Do they hide it really well? And is it always a negative?
Sure. Well, first, let me say, when we jump in the topic of narcissism, I'm a lawyer, not a medical professional of any type. So I'm using the word narcissist the same way that you've kind of defined it. Someone that believes highly in themselves, doesn't think highly of others, and has probably low EQ. And so that's the way I look at it. And just as we would say with respect to toxic loyalty and nepotism, the same applies with narcissism, which is we all have it, right? Everybody's got it. It depends on the continuum of where you are. And so the question is, why in some of these prolific, successful families is usually the leader of the organization tending to be askew higher on that narcissistic approach?
Very true.
And so recognizing that we all have it, including myself, I doubt you have any, Angelo, but knowing that narcissism can exist and does exist, then let's examine it and why. And so I know there's all the medical reasons, right? And I'm, again, not a medical professional, but looking at it from a business person, a family office person, someone who grew up in a family business, someone as a lawyer who's worked with family offices, let's look at the trajectory of that person that now is the top of the food chain. Again, whether it's family or non-family. And usually when you look at the family member, especially when it's a Gen 1, Gen 2, maybe even Gen 3, they've overcome the odds, right? They were told the first gen that you're going to fail. They would go to a bank and get a loan and get rejected. They would ask a friend for advice and they'd say, you're a fool, don't do it. They'd have some mistakes along the way and they would overcome it. They would face litigation and get sued over something because that's what happens in commerce, right? You get involved in litigation. So you've got people saying that you're not going to make it, people saying you're going to fail, you're being attacked by outsiders, you're being turned down by banks. And what happens? You succeed. You succeed beyond the scope of everybody else. And that begins to build a little confidence. And that confidence taken to an extreme becomes hubris. And that hubris then, where I'm right, because look at my history, everybody said no. And guess what? I won and I did it right. So that means not only am I great, that means everybody else is wrong. And guess what then happens with that third element? Again, three elements: high thoughts about yourself, low thoughts about others, and lack of or small EQ, intelligent quotient, emotional quotient, empathy, right? When they reach that success and then they become cynical about others, they begin to lose their empathy. They don't really focus on that. And empathy, just like all of our things, our EQ, our IQ, our AQ, I've got all these Qs that I focus on with families, but they need to be nurtured and developed. And so what happens is they're surrounded by also all these advisors who are thinking technical, right? You made a lot of money. You are successful. So you know what? We need to create more structures, more trusts, more vehicles to do investments, more this, more that. And so we keep skewing. I'm going to go back to the left brain kind of things, which is all the tactical, the objective. If you do this approach, you'll save X millions or billions of taxes. If you do this, your ROI or your ROE is this. But wait, what about the other part of my brain and the other thing that matters, which is the human component, the family dynamics, who I am as a person, my EQ. If you're not active and intentional and thoughtful about where am I on the left brain versus the right brain, it's not going to function properly. So these great leaders often tend to have atrophy, I call it, atrophy of their EQ, right? And because they're focused so much on the others, and they fought battles and they won. So it's a really vicious cycle that it seems natural that these successful business leaders have some form and skew higher on narcissism because of that, from a non-medical point of view.
That was excellent, Richard. And basically, a little bit of my follow-up on that. And again, I'm probably better off keeping my mouth quiet. I get in enough trouble as it is. I effectively completely agree with you. Now, there are variants along the scale of narcissism. And like you said, our experience often shows that people that are very, very, very successful, a fair enough of the time, they do, and maybe it's developed for that success for the reasons that you noted, do fall somewhere. Could I go with the word spectrum, on the spectrum for narcissism? To assume that you could be the nice person, you could have a truckload of empathy, and you're going to be the world's greatest entrepreneur and create $1 billion company. Maybe, and that's awesome, by the way. It just hasn't been the experiences that I've had around the world in various cultures, that this is a reality that you do have to face with wealth creators. And now that becomes challenging. How does that seep into the children and grandchildren, the heirs? Do they develop a sense of grandiose and a lack of empathy? And character in the children and grandchildren, I could argue, kind of might be number one. Like, if you want to go along with culture and leadership and how to make decisions, it really is going to be based in a sense of moral purpose and character, which I think is very, very important. I think it does become tricky in non-family members in the family office that may have some narcissistic tendencies. But Richard, I'm making it hard for you a little bit today. Suppose whatever, it's a direct investor in the CIO's position or auspice, and that person is really, really good. You want their talent. You may not want them polluting a small structure of whatever, 5, 10, 15 people in a 5-day-a-week office. Do you allow them to work from home 5 days a week? How do you manage someone who may have some of those tendencies, but damn it, maybe that makes them really good?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. They're really good, and what does that mean if you allow someone really good in and keep them in where they're toxic and hurtful to the rest of the system? And so, how the question is, I think, how do you break through? How do you begin to change the paradigm and have them be a little bit less on that spectrum or continuum to that high degree? And so, one is, again, creating governance structures where you can kind of contain and control what that person's impact is on the system. But you shouldn't really design a system around a person, right? And so really understanding and kind of maybe stepping back too on defining what the family's values are, what the family's culture is, and really in placing importance of that. I've got some families that when you actually walk in their family office, all their values are painted all over the place. Yeah. They implant it everywhere. And again, I think there is a subliminal impact to others in the organization when they're walking in every day and they see those values. And it's a really easy conversation to have with somebody who is breaching those values because of their attitude and approach with others. That narcissism is skewing high. And so again, having those values and culture defined, making it permeate throughout the organization, having little conversations, but dealing with the family principal who skews high is a really difficult task because they are the controller, and nobody, going back to that toxic loyalty, right, wants to necessarily confront that narcissist, because if you do, you can get cut out of the will cut out of the estate plan, cut out of the business, cut out of the philanthropy, cut out of the distributions. And so people
It
tend to
sounds like
then
we've
just,
been watching the show Succession a little bit. What a great
no,
show.
no one's been murdered. So, but you're right.
Well,
It
you're
really,
really up to date on it.
but
Actually, being serious for a second, it actually is a very well acted program. I may disagree on some things, but it's meant to be sensationalist for quote unquote for TV. It's actually pretty damn good compared to most else that has been out there relative a little bit in our community. It probably is still the best.
well,
Oh, please, Richard.
so I was going to just say that, so we've been talking about maybe like the non-family CIO as an example of the narcissist, but really, how do you handle the family principle that's tending high on that spectrum? And again, I see, to me, not that I want those types of clients all the time, but the risk reward with a client of that type, with a family that has that type of leader, to me is ideal, because it's risky, it's difficult work, you may not get through, but when you do have that breakthrough, when you do get that person to change their behavior, it opens up unbelievable euphoria in a family system. And so I've got a number of those types of family clients and had success. And so the question is, again, without the psychological or psychiatry or therapy or counseling background, how do you do it? I think, again, I look at the left brain, right brain kind of thing, and understanding that someone with that personality tends to skew on the objective and think highly of themselves and little of others and has little empathy. I look at what is the core of that person. They're not necessarily, even though we've just made them sound like a bad person, they're really great people inside. They just need to unlock it. And so my approach with people like that isn't to come in and talk about any kind of structure or tax savings or business growth or investment growth. On the other side, I'm not going to start talking about what they'll call the mushy, soft side of family. What is the core of many of these people is that they're great business leaders. They love talking about business. Whatever that thing is that particular person really finds great enjoyment is, the advisor needs to attach onto that and find out what really motivates that person. You build the trust, you build the relationship, and then you can talk about how you're going to implement something through some sort of structure or vehicle. Or you talk about, hey, we need to talk about some family dynamic issues now that we're on the same page of where this business is going. And so it's trying to thread that needle, find out how to build the trust, and then start chipping away, and always go slowly, right? This is a crawl, walk, maybe never run approach with a family member like this. And I've seen too many families say, we need to hurry this process up. Well, you know what? You might just break it if you go too quickly. It takes time to build trust and to build a relationship and to move a person from no and stuck to opening their heart, right? And caring about the family and caring about their own legacy, right? Ultimately, the question I'll ask those types of people is, well, what do you want your legacy to be? We're not going to be here forever. What is the point of all this wealth, right? There's dysfunction here. There's unhappiness there. Why did you create all this? What's the point? Do you want to leave Earth having tattered relationships? Or do you want to leave Earth knowing that your family's intact and have peace of mind? When you can be that direct and confront people who are that extreme, it's the first time that someone has really approached them like that. Because why? We'll go back to the first subject, toxic loyalty.
Exactly.
People don't want to have that difficult conversation. They don't want to confront that person. But when you do, it's almost like a relief. I've seen titans of industry cry, Angelo, just by asking them at the right time and the right way a simple question: what's the point? And when they say, oh, I don't understand what you're saying. You say, you know what I'm asking. Don't try and buy time or avoid the question. What's the point? And just asking that one question, I've seen great titans just open up and unleash 50, 60, 70, 80 years of angst and want to change.
That's a great question to ask, Richard, and very helpful for our audience. Some of the traits that make an entrepreneur successful, and potentially somewhere on the spectrum, some of the aspects of narcissism could be there. One of them, it's not a part of narcissism, but it's a little bit related. Uh, and many famous psychologists have mentioned this. And in my anecdotal evidence with the super rich and successful, they do tend to be somewhat non agreeable. They're a little bit of a believer of I'm incredibly successful or striving to be there, and you're not. Therefore, I don't want to be with the masses. I don't want to be agreeable, quote unquote. And I have found that to be true. So maybe in creating the wealth and being an entrepreneur, those appear to be traits that may have a level of success. However, those are probably terrible relative to family continuity and passing down to the generations. And now we go back to why most families of great wealth do not last beyond quote unquote 3 generations, why most family offices fall apart within the first generation losing interest. What makes someone successful may not necessarily, unless they adapt through mentoring and empathy and understanding, what's going to continue the success in the family.
You're right, and that modeling that of the behavior of the leader of the organization is actual modeling that the next gen and the next gen are going to be looking at. And well, if that made him or her successful with that approach, then that's what I'm going to adopt. And that can be really uncomfortable. It's not natural for some people, but they take that on, or that we'll just call it braggadocious, super aggressive, super overly confident type person really becomes a detriment to themselves and unhealthy the organization. And so it's really important to step back as a next gener and say, well, how do I break that cycle? Right? I don't want to have an organization like that. That is really not example of our culture. It's not really our family values, right? We have a family leader who has achieved great success, but the way he or she acts, that's unacceptable. And I'm going to break that cycle rather than continue it.
I did promise the audience I didn't want to leave them hanging on, what are the 3 dark triad traits? We went over narcissism. The next one that commonly comes up, just to touch upon it, is Machiavellism, characterized by the manipulation and exploitation of others. And in case you're wondering, the third one, and probably, well, not probably, the most evil, is a psychopath by antisocial behavior, impulsive control, which really is a lack of emotional intelligence and regulation, selfishness, callous, and emotional traits that are completely remorseless. There actually may be some value in narcissism and Machiavellianism in some of the ways we described for creating something from nothing, especially when you come from nothing. However, there is no advantage I could see in psychopath. So therefore, the dark triad traits. So maybe the question for you, Richard, and this may go back to me bashing a little bit of HR earlier, is maybe more so from building out the family office, often with non-family members. Do you screen, or would you screen for these traits? And how would you do so? Again, I'm a little bit not all on board with what I call traditional HR. I'm not really on board with a lot of what I see from the field of psychologist. I don't think that's necessarily understanding what makes an entity, quote unquote, successful. But there needs to be some metrics where you're screening, because in a small entity of a single family office, whatever, 7 people, 12 people, even 20, still relatively small, one really, really bad person, that could pollute everything.
Well, you're absolutely right. The interesting thing about family office, and if we're talking about a first, second, maybe 3rd-generation family office in particular, more so than more developed or further generational family offices, is that what is a family office? Who are the people you're actually hiring? So you may have made your wealth in manufacturing. You may have made your money in tech. You may have made your money in all these other industries. But running and managing and hiring for a family office, you're hiring professional advisors. You're hiring professionals. You're not hiring people to run a manufacturing plant, right? And so the principal who made the wealth thinks, well, look at the great culture I had at my manufacturing plant. Here's the type of people we hired. Here's my management approach. Well, going to the third shift and motivating your employees when you're in your manufacturing role is much different than hiring a CIO, a CTO, a general counsel, right? Wealth advisors. People are constructing your portfolios, doing tax planning, right? It's a different type of employee to manage. And so I don't think enough people stop to think, really, what is my management style and approach for managing these highly intelligent professional advisors?
How do these issues that we discussed, toxic loyalty, nepotism, narcissism, kind of intersect? And the combined risk, let alone independently, that they pose. And now we're seeing why most families and family offices really don't last, quote unquote, generationally. What could we, I know it's going to go back to culture and governance, but what could we do to further identify, talk about, strategize, and execute to address some of these issues?
Sure. Well, I think first recognizing and being open about it, that it does exist in our organization, no matter what. There are elements, and as whether you say spectrum or continuum, it does exist. And so being open, honest about it, and then looking for symptoms of it. I think making sure your advisors are really in check with it, because the advisors can actually enable, right, and hurt the family system by being that toxic loyal person, which is yes, 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 to a narcissist, which is, hey, I really like that person because they keep agreeing with me and I am right. And then, hey, we're going to bring in the next gen and we're going to model this terrible behavior. So we're going to use nepotism the wrong way as well. So you're right. These are all together. And so, my approach to be working with families, and it might be different than most, is that I come into an engagement which is different than how a lawyer, when I practice law, could come into engagement. A family principal hires me to, let's just say, to help them with their estate planning. Well, the lens of that engagement is with the principal, the grantor, in mind. It may not be, he or she might say, well, here's what I want the beneficiaries, here's what I hope for, but this is the way it is. Well, as a lawyer, you have a duty to follow your client's instructions, right? And so you might challenge him or her, and you will challenge him or her, but ultimately you're going to go with what the client wants. And if you look at the accounting profession, it's very similar. You look at the wealth management profession, they follow the money and who the decision makers are. Sure, and I'm not trying to disparage lawyers, accountants, wealth managers, but fundamentally, that's your client. So when I take on engagements, I require all family members, all owners and beneficial owners to sign my engagement letter. It means I have to have the family system represented, not a certain generation, not a particular branch, but the system. And I take the time ahead of time, pre-engagement, to make sure I meet the people. And that could be as few as 3 or 4 people, but it could be as many as 80 people, to go one-on-one and get to know them so that when I am engaged, they feel comfortable signing the engagement letter. So when I begin the engagement, that means I'm working for the system. So I have authority to challenge the principal. I have authority to challenge the next gen who's underperforming or going in the wrong direction, because the system wants me to represent everybody and help everybody.
I'm not really sure how to perfectly phrase my next question, but tying it a little bit together and goes into the bucket of nepotism. It relates a little bit to equal opportunities, of course, but not necessarily equal outcomes. We all have different skill sets, different motivations, and sometimes there's outside dynamics that come into play. Therefore, this still goes into the bigger issue of we're bringing a boatload of challenges here. in terms of toxic loyalty, in terms of nepotism, which again could be positive, but too often over time tends not to be. But why? That goes back a little bit to my comment that I just said, to areas around narcissism. This just goes to show you that these small private family businesses, entities, family offices, I think we're understanding more and more as to the challenges they face and why they face the obstacles and the grave challenges of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, why most family offices don't last beyond 1 generation. What is a fault, Richard, of our industry, those that advise and consult to family offices? Do we tend to look at things too siloed? Let's assume I'm a family governance person and therefore everything is going to be the nail to my hammer, or everything is solved by investments, or everything is solved by strategy. They're all kind of correct independently as being very, very important. How do they sync and come together as one?
So there's a multiple things to do. So one is how you enter the engagement. Again, is your client? Who do you represent? To the extent possible, the broadest possible engagement is going to help that situation, so it doesn't become generational or branch fighting. Number one. Number two is inclusion of the next gen 100% as early and soon as the client will permit, with great nudging and prodding and suggesting to get them engaged, just to come and sit in meetings.
Could that be as early as teen years?
That could be as little as babies and toddlers who actually sit in the meetings with their toys and are playing and being disruptive. But guess what? That 4-year-old is going to become a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. And that eventually, by the time they're 10, let's just say they're 10, and they've been doing this for 10 years, coming in to the family meetings and sitting there and put their toys and crying and being disruptive, that 10-year-old is going to be much further advanced than, let's say, now you're 10 years old and we're going to begin with you now, right? And you can just take that same thing. Well, now you're 18. Now you're in college. Now you're post-college. We want to invite you in. Think about all the learning that was missed during those years. Think about all the modeling that was missed during those years. Think about all the family values and the conversations that person missed. I mean, people talk about wealth transfer. What family offices are really trying to do, in my opinion, the healthy ones, are trying to do values transfer.
Exactly.
Right? Wealth transfer versus values transfer. And you have to be in the arena. You have to be in the room. You have to be participating. You have to be engaging in order for all that to happen. It's just parenting. It's parenting in the business. So invite them in, encourage them, be transparent. I can tell you, families that sit down with their children when they're young and set the conditions right and teach and are open book are going to have a much higher success rate than those that don't. Period.
100%. That was incredibly well said, Richard, and greatly appreciated. And these are all the challenges that I think anyone, even an entrepreneur starting a business, engaging family, it's not just families of great success, although there's lessons to be learned from all of this. 2 topics briefly that I think are somewhat related. Well, first I'll bring up, I believe it was Jay Hughes and Christian Stewart in our community that have spoken about things like teaching and building capacity and capability in the rising generation family members. If you do everything for them and they don't learn character and responsibility and accountability, then how are they ever going to be anti-fragile? And this goes back to me talking earlier more so about bureaucracy and over governance could potentially cause more fragility in the family than it protects against. So this may go back a little bit to how do you have that balance of the right amount of governance and transparency and not layer after layer after layer. And even is it not just the family, but the family office's role, if they're so engaged to or proactively bring up to help teach capacity and capability in the rising generations?
So again, that starts with early inclusion, early engagement, having the children come into the family office on the weekend, on the holidays, in the summer. If you don't have a family office, it's the family business, the same concept. And that they're going to start soaking it up and seeing what appropriate conduct is like. Just imagine when you teach your young child to come into the office and shake someone's hand and look them in the eyes, and then you teach them about appreciation and to thank the team and the staff for their job, just to say, hi, my name is Sarah, thank you for what you do for our family. Like that little type of thing starts to build the culture and the character of the individual, right? And it's just so powerful to see family after family that does these things. I know it's scary because they're like, well, do I really want to bring my child into this environment? They're really not prepared. They might cause noise. They might spill the soda. Well,
who cares?
Right.
Clean it up.
And you know what it says to the non-family employees early on? Like, this is a family that I want to work for. Like, look at how amazing this is that they're coming in on their holidays from college or during high school or during middle school, and they're working. They're coming in here. Like, this is the vibe that I want, because when you look at it, how many people want to really work for the unnamed employer and just be a cog in the wheel? At the end of the day, job satisfaction is related to your performance. And the satisfaction is you care who you work with more than actually what you're doing. So who you're with and seeing those family values come to life in a time and age where, especially through COVID, where we become so distant and remote, to actually have families engage, come in, participate, thank, observe, learn. I mean, I think you're going to attract and retain greater non-family employees as a result.
Of course. And two final quick points and questions. And by the way, most people in our industry would disagree with me on this, and that's okay. That's how we all learn. When it comes to engaging the rising generation, and when I look at things where why it's not lasting beyond 3 generations, why there's not continuity like some of the old European families that I've worked and consulted for that go back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. There's a variety of moving parts, but I've always been a big advocate of being active in direct and controlling interest in private companies. And when you no longer have that entity internally as the family business, that doesn't mean that you still can't either create or buy. Don't forget, Elon Musk didn't create Tesla. He purchased it and obviously did amazing things with it. But think of the lessons, Richard, how the real world works, how you source, how you negotiate, how you do diligence, how people lie, how you need to double check, how you may need financing. How does that work? How do I know if the management team is good? How about hiring and firing? How about strategy? How about business execution? I don't know any university that could teach the lessons that a real business, no matter what kind of business it is, it's a great training ground. Now, I know some are going to say you don't buy a business where people's lives are dependent on it, and quote unquote young ones make it up in their 20s are deciding their fate. I hear you, but I believe they could do also incredible things. And my role is for continuity of the family. And this is a way for them to be very, very hands on. When I see families that become multi-generational and the family is removed from finance and from capital, and I know it's controversial here, people have a heart attack when I say this, like it's all passive, it's all outsourced. We trust this, we trust that. There is no way that is going to last generation after generation. You could tell me I'm wrong and I want to listen and learn. Maybe there's a compromise, or maybe I'm 100% right. What do you think, Richard?
Well, I don't know if it's controversial. What I think is that continuity, for the sake of continuity, is not the reason to have continuity. So if you walk in a manufacturing plant, which I've just done for one of my clients, and they all have them, they have a big sign with a number of days where there hasn't been a workers' comp accident, right? There hasn't been a safety issue. And everybody takes pride in, we're at 103 days, or we're at 784 days before anyone got hurt. Well, if you take that same kind of thing to, I'm a G7, I'm a G8, I'm a G6, I'm a G whatever. Well, what is the point of that generational growth? Is it just to say that we've made it, or we're being purposeful? And so you're right. When the diversity in the families and not everyone working in the family office or the family enterprise, there becomes detachment. And so again, going back to governance, education, what is going on in the family business? Those that don't work in the family business need greater education about what's happening, because ultimately there may be a vote that's required to recapitalize the business. And those that say, why are we reinvesting the money in the business instead of making distributions? I want the distributions. Well, if you don't understand the business and the need that we have to grow financially, well, then that begins the problem, number one. Number two, in terms of governance, every family needs a buy-sell agreement, no matter what the trust is. And this has to be coordinated in conjunction with the trust. But families that don't have buy-sell agreements, there needs to be an exit ramp for people who either are too difficult or disagree or want out. Holding family members hostage in this machine is a very unhealthy thing too. And so over time, as you said, Angela, people's skills, interests, resources, risk take tolerance, all that matters. And maybe they want to leave. And if they can't leave, and there's no exit for them to leave, and there's no structure for them to leave, and we haven't defined it or built it, what the evaluation is and how to actually implement your exit and what that means in terms of dollars and cents, you're going to have an unhappy shareholder, right? And that unhappy shareholder is going to bleed into the whole organization. In addition
and
to
possibly conflict and intrafamily lawsuits. Yeah. Yes.
Right. So governance, again, is the overreaching thing to me always that helps really solve all problems if it's done right. And it's not perfect, and no one's expecting perfection, but if you can anticipate all these things, which we all can, then what are the tools and mechanisms to help mitigate the problem and to have enduring, healthy, prosperous, harmonious family systems?
Of course. And those are all the challenges in a larger scale by family member, multi-generational families. There are some times where there is going to be a situation to bifurcate because they don't have an interest in being part. They're not rowing on the same team. That might even be okay. They have a different vision, a different direction. And what could you do to potentially give them their share? So you still have harmony at family holidays and meetings, which is also why by far the easiest governance, but it could lull us into a sense of false security, is a very small family unit. I'm the wealth creator. I have a spouse. I have 2 young children. Very simply, I am the dictator. I think it was Warren Buffett that said, I like an investment committee that's an odd number and it's less than 3. That is very, very easy. It absolutely simplifies and gets rid of hierarchy and bureaucracy. In the short term, it might even be incredible. But how is that going to work in today's world long term when your children, your grandchildren are only seeing that dictatorial type of a leadership? How is that going to work generationally? If you go by the statistics, very simply, Richard, it's not.
Well, family business is tough, but the non-family environment is tough too. And so the question is, how do you take the emotion out? As you said early on, there are tremendous, great business principles that are never applied to family enterprise because we say we're a family enterprise. Well, that's not true. Let's have a strategic plan for the family. We know they do it on the business side. Let's make sure that our culture is intentional on the family. We do it in the business. We have proper agreements, and a buy-sell agreement, as an example, in our business with our business partners. Why don't we have a buy-sell agreement with our family members, and how to have exits for them when they want? Why do we hold new employees in a business environment up here? Like, great, you're coming in, Angelo, into our firm, a non-family owned firm, because you have ideas, you have outside expertise, you have drive. If you take that same Angelo into a family that's your family, they might say, whoa, Angelo, put the brakes on. We don't really want to hear about all that outside expertise. Your energy and passion, that's great, but it's not your turn to lead. And so why do we have this wall between great business principles and not applying to family enterprise? And what we need to do is probably take some here that go here and vice versa. And that's will get the longevity. That will drive the continuity. That will drive the harmony.
And last question, actually perfect timing via text, actually. I guess you're too bashful to be in the DMs here at StreamYard from one of my members, Jim, and basically wants your opinion on something that is not perfectly related to what we're talking about today, but there's elements of it that is. And we spoke about it with people, either intra-family or outside the family, being the number one determinant. We spoke a little bit about HR and or what I prefer, a chief people officer. And I do think there are nuances and differences that you'll hear me have some interviews, quasi debates upcoming. Apparently I like those in the next coming week to months. And that question is because they heard me or they read my writings and heard me talk about it, the word obsession. So, and again, I'm probably different than how most people feel about this, which is fine. I might be right. I might be wrong. I believe when it comes in family or external from the family, but in the family enterprise or family office, I think it's very important. Sure, high IQ basically means you're smart. You have the capability of doing critical thinking, of juggling potentially multiple things, whether that's good or bad, and hopefully making good decisions. You can't really be part of a team and foster the culture in the family or family office without good or good enough emotional intelligence. But I'm an extreme advocate, which is what they're asking about, and they want your opinion on the word obsession, which tends to have, I don't know why, a negative connotation to some people, because it can be. But I'm an extreme advocate of, I think it's hard to be very, very successful. Maybe I'm just type A. It is really hard, and maybe I'm just not smart enough to rely solely on IQ. I want obsession in my people. Now, some of the audience is going to be aghast. I'm a non-family member, and you want me to be obsessed? If I'm paying you, and I'm paying you top quartile, and I'm treating you right, I may be a little difficult, but I'm treating you right and you're earning money and I'm taking care of you from that perspective. I want you to be smart. I want you to be a good communicator with emotional intelligence. And I think for me to demand excellence in the family office, which I think only about 3% of family offices reach, I think it's hard to do it. Maybe not impossible. It's hard to do it without consistent obsession from your people. Now, I know my audience is going to say, you want us to be more than 9 to 5 to work on weekends. Sometimes, yes, that is absolutely needed. If you want to be successful and create your own wealth and money where you have freedom and financial freedom, you can't be average. The world is different now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. If you're not obsessed, then honestly, call me an idiot. In my holding company, in my family office, I am probably not interested in you. Richard, you could tear me apart and tell me that I'm wrong.
Well, maybe obsession is on the spectrum as we talk about levels of passion, right? I think the first level is that you want your non-family staff to actually care, right? Again, let's use the left brain, right brain, assuming that they're of the left brain, the best technical acumen. Let's move to the right brain, the dynamics, the communication, the EQ side of us. And so if you're in a job and a career, and it's happened more and more, and I think that's why we're not seeing people who actually care and get to the point of passion and maybe get obsessed because they really pursued a career that they really weren't interested in, right? I think you find people who actually love what they do, enjoy what they do. It becomes so passionate that maybe it can become to an unhealthy level of obsession. But you first have to, I think people are reacting with this obsession because we're finding the other half of the employee base that don't even care. They just show up to collect a paycheck. And if we go back to those tendencies of founders, family leaders, narcissists, right? They expect high demand, high performance. And when you see your people that don't care, you've hired people that aren't the right fit, that don't go above and beyond, right? We're in a family enterprise, all working for the family. If the employee doesn't recognize who they are and really what drives them, and if all they care about are bond yields, right? They don't understand this other part, that we're doing this for family, and maybe the family then creates wealth, and part of that wealth goes back to the community in the form of philanthropy too. Like, so I think there's different ways to get your employee base to become, I don't know if it's obsessed, but to thread the needle more from showing up and collecting a paycheck to care, concern, love. I know a lot of family, non-family employees that actually love the family, right? They will jump in front of a bullet for a family member, right, to help them. So how do you get them from here to there? Well, make sure that you actually like your job and you like who you're working with. Maybe you'll become more passionate about it. I don't know if obsession is the way to be. I tend to be honest, more like you, Angelo. I think about it nonstop. The families I work for, I actually, it's like I become part of them in a healthy way to really understand their pain. To what are they doing? How can I help them navigate better? When they hurt, I hurt, and I don't want them to. So I don't know if that's obsession or extreme care, but you have to personify and you have to get in character to really understand the family in order to help the family. You have to become to really recognize who they are.
Richard, I love this. The hour and a half basically flew by. It's a little bit of a different subject than my normal geopolitics, economics, and investing, and how that interplays within single family offices and best practices. But these are tenement of important, from culture to leadership to the areas that pertain to the challenges, including toxic loyalty, that we spoke about today. Richard, for those that would like to follow you on LinkedIn, learn more about your practice, how could they reach out to you and learn more?
Sure, you can. I'm on LinkedIn. Name of my firm is Xylogenesis. Xylogenesis, Xylogenesis. By the way, that stands for the process of tree ring creation. If you ever cut a tree and you see all those rings, the process of tree ring creation is called xylogenesis. And it's a good metaphor for another time to talk about how tree rings are a metaphor for family health too, and the growth of a family.
And by the way, for those of you that may wonder, I will spell Richard's last name Wolkowitz, as in zebra. Richard is one of the true treasures within the community. I learn so much from him whenever I read his content on LinkedIn, his website, his white papers, his work that he does. It's incredibly insightful and valuable for me and really families around the world. And his unique perspective, again, generationally a family member, an entrepreneur, an attorney, a consultant. As you could tell, he's a very good listener, and the opportunity to understand the nuances. I don't understand why you're not going to follow Richard. Of course you are. And why, if you're in our community, you should reach out and say hello. Richard, you might have mentioned it, but I was trying to figure out how to spell the company name. But for those that would like to go to the website, besides just LinkedIn, did you give the website information?
Sure. Thanks, Angelo. It's xylogenesis.com. And to learn more, I've got a tab of resource page that has articles and white papers I've written. There's also a podcast section, and I'm looking forward to putting this podcast at the top of my resources page.
Well, what I will say is our conversation today was somewhat evergreen, where I have these geopolitical and investment discussions, and I tell people things could be totally different tomorrow. Whereas in the subjects we're talking about now, I mean, really, we could put this in a time capsule, and in 100 years, there may be little nuances that are different, but I think human nature, which has evolved for a long, long time, a couple of years is not going to change, quote unquote, that much. And I'm going to spell Richard's company so it's easier again to follow to the website. X as an X-ray, YLOGENESIS. Richard, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for the generosity of your time and imparting knowledge to me where I learned, and my audience. I appreciate you, and I look forward to the next time.
Angelo, it was a lot of fun, and thank you for all you do for the family office community. Your words and stepping out there and not being a conformist as well is really a healthy thing to do for the community.
Yeah, I'm probably not the most loved person in the community, but I do appreciate you. And even those that may be a little bit of some different perspective, you're smart and awesome, and you may not learn from me, which is fine. Maybe you are better off, but I'm learning from all of you. That's why I put in 2 or 3 hours a day of research, because there's such incredible people in this community that there's a lot that I could learn from. And really, in my wrap up, it's pretty simple. Follow me on YouTube at Family Office. Yeah, I've owned that for a gazillion years. It's not for sale, big banks, so stop asking. At Family Office TV. My newer podcast for old school Apple and Spotify is simply Angelo Robles Podcast. And go to my website, simply my name, angelorobles.com, and learn more, including my recent white paper. It's probably the most comprehensive paper that I publicly submitted, meaning not just to members, in a long, long time. And I have lots of programming that's going to be coming up on that. So simply go to angelorobles.com and also look into membership, which is on there if you're a direct family member and or a single family office executive. We look forward to potentially getting to know and work with you. So thank you all very much. Thank you, audience. And again, Richard, thank you for being such a great guest. I appreciate you.
It's a lot of fun, Angelo. Thank you.
Thank you.